I thought I escaped her control when I turned 18. But the truth is she'd been planning something far worse all along. Welcome to Reddit Toxic Family Telltales channel. New episode every day. Did your parents ever let you say what was on your mind? Mine didn't. My mother literally charged us for speaking. I'm not kidding, when I was 7 it was a penny a word. She kept raising her rates until my brother and I owed her more money than we could ever hope to pay back. She went all in on this system. Installed cameras in every single room, spent hours each night reviewing the recordings, scribbling tallies in these big leather-bound ledgers. Sundays were bill day. She'd sit us down and present our weekly totals like some twisted accountant. That first week, I owed $3. Paid it out of my piggy bank. She smiled and said this would teach me the value of words. My dad lasted maybe a month before he cracked. He couldn't handle living in forced silence anymore. He left, but not before she sent him off with his final bill. She even framed it in the kitchen. $1, $8.47, for one argument where he called her insane. That bill hung there like a trophy. Every birthday she hiked the price. 8 years old? A nickel per word. 10 years old? A quarter. By 13 it was $1 each. By 14 my brother just stopped talking. Completely. He'd try writing notes at first, but then she banned writing too, called it cheating her system. To enforce her madness she actually hired her cousin to shadow us at school. Teachers got letters telling them not to encourage excessive speaking from her kids. I tried to find loopholes. Sign language with my brother? She learned it too and doubled the rate for foreign languages. Saved my birthday money to pay her off? She tacked on interest that grew faster than I could save. I once stole one of her ledgers to burn it. She had backups. Slapped me with a $1,000 tampering fee. By 16 I was buried under 12 grand in debt. She started taking every cent from my part-time job. I was practically mute at school. My counselor noticed and asked what was wrong. I wrote her notes begging for help. She called child services. But mom already had paperwork ready, diagnosing me with selective mutism from trauma. She showed receipts for fake therapy and my silence just made her story believable. The social worker left convinced I was broken. As soon as the door closed, mom handed me a $5,000 fine for defamation through writing and banned me from even touching a pencil. Her punishments got crueler when we couldn't pay. My brother had to stand in the corner, 1 hour for every $100 owed. Then it escalated. Days sleeping on the floor, 1 for every 1,000 in debt. Meals became 1 grain of rice per dollar forgiven. We were starving, thinner every week, while she kept raising the stakes. She even installed locks on the fridge and bathroom. $2 to pee. 5 for a shower. 10 for anything from the kitchen. I got crafty with silence. Gestures, expressions, little charades with my brother and the few friends who understood. But then she decided expressive movement counted too. $20 for a nod. 50 for pointing. 100 for a thumbs up. More cameras went up, watching every twitch. My brother eventually froze into near statue mode, barely breathing, terrified of being fined for existing. At work, my coworker noticed. I spoke to customers and clipped one-word sentences, nothing extra. She found me crying in the break room after mom sent me a revised bill $37,000. She offered me her couch, helped me plan. The idea was to leave right before my 18th birthday, when I could finally access my savings. We whispered plans in writing at work. But mom was always one step ahead. She found my packed bag under the bed. She'd installed weight sensors wired to her phone. That night at dinner she unveiled her new rates. $50 per word. Retroactive. To birth. She slid papers across the table showing I had owed millions since my first word as a baby. Her cousin stood looming behind me while she explained that running away would violate the verbal contract I'd signed at 7 years old. That's when I snapped. After 3 years of near silence I blurted out, "This is insane." 3 words. $150. She smiled and wrote it down. "You can't charge babies for talking?" I shouted. 7 more words. $350. My brother shook his head desperately, begging me to stop. But I couldn't. It all came pouring out, the years of rage, the truth about her system, what I thought of her twisted little empire. Every word burned like freedom. She sat calmly, scribbling every sentence. When I was done she tallied it up. 43,000 new charges, she announced. Added to the 37,000 you already owed, that's 80,000 total. Then she opened a drawer. Inside were tools I'd never seen in our house before, dental equipment, surgical instruments, sharp steel glinting under the kitchen light. She picked up a scalpel, smiling. "You know what's cheaper than charging per word?" she asked softly. Not having the ability to speak at all. My brother jolted up. He yanked open the silverware drawer and grabbed a knife, holding it to his own throat. His eyes were wide, wet with tears as he gestured furiously at her. Forgive the debt, or he'd do it. But mom barely even looked at him. "Go ahead," she said coldly. "Your debt transfers to your sister. It's in the contract." The knife slipped from his hand. He crumpled, sobbing. Mom calmly dialed a number. "Yes," she said into the phone. "Tomorrow morning. Bring the surgical kit." Then she hung up and locked eyes with me. "Dr. Baker owes me a favor," she said. "We've discussed options for children who won't stop talking, despite the financial burden they cause their families. Finally, I'm going to have some peace and quiet." And I realized she wasn't bluffing. I lunged across the table, ripping the knife out of my brother's trembling hands before he could do something he'd never come back from. The blade clattered against a pile of dirty dishes in the sink, the sound ringing through the kitchen like an alarm. I locked eyes with him, mouthing the words asterisk, trust me. Asterisk, his face crumpled, but he gave me the smallest nod. Mom didn't even flinch. That same cold smile stretched wider across her face as she slid her phone out. Her fingers flew across the screen, scrolling through her contacts, her eyes darting back and forth between us like a predator making sure her prey stayed put. She tapped the call button, turned slightly away, and started confirming plans with Dr. Baker, tomorrow morning, surgical kit, everything they'd discussed. My brother sagged in his chair, looking broken. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling, and headed toward my room as if nothing was wrong. Mom's cousin shifted his weight to block the front door. He didn't say a word, but I knew he'd be stationed there all night if she asked. Back in my room, I pressed my ear to the door. Her voice carried down the hall as she went into detail, permanent damage to vocal cords, making it look like a medical complication. She was practically giddy as she described erasing my voice forever. My hands shook as I reached into the ripped seam of my mattress and pulled out the old burner phone I'd hidden months ago. The cracked screen flickered to life, and I slid it under the gap in my door, recording every word. I caught it all, her laugh, her promises to pay him $15,000 out of my college fund, the one she'd stolen control of years ago. When she finally hung up, I stopped the recording and saved it 3 times in different folders. Then I opened the secret thread with my coworker, the one we'd been using to plan for weeks. We'd made code words for different levels of danger. My thumbs typed out the one we swore we'd only use if everything was on fire, asterisk red alert. Tomorrow morning. Need extraction, asterisk my finger hovered for a second, then pressed send. 30 seconds later, those typing bubbles appeared. Asterisk I'll be there. 2 blocks away. 6 a.m. engine running, asterisk. I deleted the thread, shoved the phone back into the mattress and moved to my window. I pushed it up an inch and froze, the sensor wires gleamed faintly in the track. She'd rigged it with a transmitter. One wrong move, her phone would light up. My stomach twisted. The door had the same setup, plus a tiny camera pointed straight at my bed. She'd turned my room into a prison cell, and I hadn't even noticed. The house fell quiet. The only sounds were her sitcom laugh track from the living room and the faint creak of my brother's floorboards next door. I lay down fully dressed, heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest, and stared at the glowing digits on my hidden phone. Every minute dragged. At exactly 4 a.m. I slipped out of bed. I pulled out the wire hanger from under my dresser, slid it under the door, and swiped it back and forth in the hallway until the bathroom motion sensor went off. The alarm beeped loudly, just like I hoped. Mom's bedroom door opened with a slam. Her footsteps pounded past my door as she cursed at the broken sensor. I moved fast. Clear tape strips went over the window wires, holding them in place. My hands shook so badly the roll almost slipped. I raised the window inch by inch until it was fully open. The tape held. I grabbed my phone, climbed onto the sill, and lowered myself down. 8 feet wasn't much, but my sweaty hands slipped. I landed in the thorn bushes with a sickening thud, air punched out of my lungs. Thorns shredded my arms as the neighbor's dog exploded into barking. My ankle screamed, but I forced myself up and bolted for the street. Headlights swept across me. Mom's cousin's car rolled up, his door already swinging open. My chest froze until another pair of headlights came flying around the corner. My coworker's car. Passenger door wide open. I didn't think. I dove in while the car was still moving, slamming the door shut as she floored it. Tires squealed. Mom's cousin lunged out of his car, but we were already gone, tearing down the street at 50 miles an hour through a neighborhood that was still half asleep. We didn't stop until she'd twisted through 4 turns and pulled behind the dumpsters of her apartment complex. Hidden from the road. Safe. For the first time in years, safe. The moment the car shut off, I collapsed, shaking, sobbing, blood still dripping down my arms from the thorns. She guided me inside, made tea with trembling hands, even toasted bread though I couldn't bring myself to eat. She called in sick for both of us, food poisoning, she told the store manager. Then she sat down beside me, her voice quiet but steady. We have to go to the police, she said. Tonight. She handed me her phone. The number for the domestic violence hotline already dialed. My thumb hovered over the screen. The counselor's voice was calm, steady, until I played the recording. Mom's voice came crackling through, clear as day, talking about slicing vocal cords and paying Dr. Baker with my stolen college fund. The counselor gasped. I could almost hear the blood drain from her face. She told me this was imminent danger, no question, and that she'd connect us with emergency legal aid right away. Then she insisted we get to a clinic as soon as possible to document everything, injuries, weight loss, signs of neglect. My coworker drove me straight there. The clinic smelled like antiseptic, harsh and cold, but for the first time I felt like maybe someone would actually see me. The doctor spent over an hour examining me. She weighed me, frowned, and noted I'd dropped 23 pounds in a year. She documented dehydration, malnutrition, and photographed the angry red grooves on my wrists from when Mom zip-tied me for skipping payment on the bathroom. The scratches from the bushes were cleaned and wrapped, my swollen ankle prodded and taped. She wrote down everything, my silence, the system, the charges. My whole nightmare finally had ink on paper. From there, we went straight to the police station. The waiting room buzzed with people complaining about parking tickets and petty arguments. I walked up to the desk with my phone clutched tight, hit play and let Mom's words fill the air. I want her vocal cords damaged permanently. The sergeant's bored look evaporated in an instant. He snatched up the phone, made a call, then personally walked us past the crowd into a small interview room. 5 minutes later, Detective Isadora Hinton walked in, legal pad under her arm, digital recorder in hand. She sat down, looked me in the eye, and started asking questions. For 3 hours she pulled the story out of me, how the word charging began, the bathroom locks, the cousin shadowing us at school, the leather ledgers, the rate hikes every birthday. I showed her the photos I'd taken of the ledgers before Mom caught me. She shook her head over and over, muttering, "In 20 years of police work I've never heard of anything like this." She called my coworker on speaker right then. My coworker confirmed everything, how she'd found me crying in the break room, how I'd only spoken in clipped phrases to customers, how we'd been planning my escape in writing for weeks. Detective Hinton filled out the paperwork for an emergency protective order, explaining it would bar Mom from contacting me until a judge could hear the case. For the first time in forever I felt a tiny spark of hope. But my chest tightened again when we went to my brother's school. I had to know he was safe. The secretary told us Mom had called him in sick that morning. My heart sank like a stone. He was still trapped in that house. And because of me, because I escaped, he might suffer worse. The secretary wouldn't give more details. I walked out of there dizzy with panic. We drove straight to the legal aid office, where attorney Berenice Hinton, no relation to the detective, was already waiting. She spread forms across her desk, her pen flying as I told the story again. She drafted a restraining order, an emergency custody petition, everything we needed to pull my brother out. She said the recording of Mom plotting surgery was the strongest piece of evidence she'd ever seen in a child abuse case. For the first time someone believed not just me but him too. Then my phone started buzzing. Again. 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 Dozens of calls. All from Mom. Against my better judgment, I listened to one voicemail. Her voice was raw, venomous, screaming that I'd stolen myself from her. Demanding the $80,000 she claimed I owed, due immediately. Berenice told me to save every single message, but not to reply. Mom would twist anything I said. She downloaded the voicemails, saved backups, even locked a flash drive copy in her cabinet. That night when we got back to my coworker's building, the security guard flagged us down. He said a man matching Mom's cousin's description had been sitting in the visitor lot for an hour before driving away. My coworker wasted no time. She called the cops again, filed another harassment report. They promised patrol cars would swing by every few hours. Still, I stayed hidden inside, every shadow outside the window making my stomach knot. By morning, 2 officers went to do a welfare check on my brother. They didn't get far. Mom answered the door with a smug smile and a stack of papers, claiming she was homeschooling him now. The officers couldn't enter without a warrant, but their body cameras caught everything. The locks. The padlock on the bathroom. The rows of bolted doors down the hall. When they came back and told Detective Hinton what they'd seen, she immediately started filing for a search warrant. This time, the evidence was undeniable. And I knew something was about to break. I called up my old school counselor, the only adult who had ever really tried to help me back then, and asked if she'd meet me. We sat across from each other in a little coffee shop near the school, the smell of burnt espresso and cinnamon rolls hanging in the air. She slid a manila envelope across the table, her hands trembling. Inside were copies of her notes from years ago, back when she'd reported my mom to CPS. Page after page, her handwriting described how I went from a normal, talkative kid to practically mute over the span of 2 years. She'd even saved the bizarre letters Mom sent to teachers, demanding they not encourage excessive talking. When I told her what happened afterward, the $5,000 fine, the total ban on pencils and pens, her face went pale. Right then and there, in the middle of that coffee shop, she grabbed a napkin and started writing a fresh statement, swearing that what she'd seen with me, and what she feared for my brother, was only scratching the surface of how bad things had gotten. From there, my coworker drove me to the bank where Mom had forced me into a joint account when I got my first job at 16. The bank manager pulled up 2 years' worth of records. And there it was, every paycheck, drained by automatic transfers straight into her account. Over $12,000 stolen. He printed everything, highlighted each transaction, and handed me a thick stack of paper. "This is financial exploitation," he said firmly. "Criminal and civil." My chest burned with both rage and relief, finally, undeniable proof. The very next day, I sat across from Conrad Shepard at CPS. The county office was drab, the lights buzzing faintly overhead, and he already had a thick folder with my name on it. He started taking notes the second I walked in. I showed him the photos I'd risked taking of the ledgers, the locks, the cameras. Then I played the audio of Mom talking about the surgery. His pen froze mid-word when he heard her say she wanted my vocal cords destroyed. He looked up at me like he couldn't believe a parent's voice had just said that. For 2 hours he asked me everything, how the system worked, how old I was when it started, the rice-counting punishments, the bathroom locks, my brother's forced silence. I told him about the new $100 per word rate. He just shook his head slowly, saying in 20 years of financial abuse cases, he had never seen anything like it. Before I left, he made copies of all my evidence and told me he'd be filing for an emergency petition immediately. 2 days later, my attorney called. "The judge wants to see us right now." We rushed to the courthouse, my stomach in knots. Judge Harrison sat in chambers with a stack of documents taller than his coffee mug. He didn't waste time. He signed a temporary restraining order on the spot. Mom couldn't come within 500 feet of me, couldn't call me, couldn't text me. And then he added a provision that nearly made me cry: no medical procedures of any kind on my brother. From silence to being the star witness in what felt like the strangest crime documentary ever, with a detective and lawyer who happened to share the same last name, but weren't even related. The order would be served within hours. If Mom violated it, she'd be in cuffs. For the first time in days, my chest actually loosened. I could breathe. But breathing didn't make the worry stop. 3 days later, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see my brother. During his lunch period, I stood by the old fence where we used to meet. I tapped 3 times on the post, our secret signal. Minutes later, he appeared. Thinner. Eyes ringed with dark circles. He pointed toward the nurse's office. Inside, Mrs. Fields let us use the back room. She didn't blink when he grabbed a pen and started writing instead of speaking. His words wobbled across the page. Mom had raised the rate to $100 per word after I escaped. He'd been forced to sleep on the basement floor 6 nights in a row because his debt had passed $6,000. Then he lifted his shirt. Bruises bloomed across his ribs. Mrs. Fields gasped, hand over her mouth, then grabbed her camera. She documented everything, his 15-pound weight loss in just 2 weeks, the cuts on his bare feet from being denied shoes, every purple bruise on his sides. He wrote that breakfast was $50, lunch was $75, so he only ate dinner now. Mrs. Fields called the principal while she kept snapping photos. Within an hour, we had a complete medical record of malnutrition and abuse. That afternoon, my attorney filed it all. Mrs. Fields' statement. The photos. My brother's testimony about the $100 per word charge. She requested immediate removal from the home, emergency foster placement, and filed child endangerment and starvation charges with the DA's office. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was his life on the line. The next morning, a process server showed up at my coworker's apartment with a thick envelope. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Mom's lawyer. According to her, I was defaming her and violating the so-called verbal contract I'd signed when I was 7. The letter demanded I drop all legal proceedings immediately and pay her not just the $80,000 she claimed I owed, but another $20,000 for defamation damages. When my attorney read it, she actually laughed. She said it was the most absurd legal threat she'd seen in her entire career. Instead of being worried, she added it to the evidence file, just another piece of proof that Mom truly believed her fantasy system was legally enforceable. That afternoon, Detective Hinton called with the news I'd been praying for. A judge had signed a search warrant. They'd be executing it at dawn the next day with a full team. She wanted to catch Mom off guard before she could destroy anything or move the surveillance equipment. I tried to go to work that night to distract myself, but I couldn't focus. My hands shook stocking shelves, my mind stuck on what might happen tomorrow. Around 8 p.m., Mom's cousin stormed into the grocery store with more papers in hand. He spotted me in the cereal aisle and started marching over. My manager intercepted him, called security, and had him escorted out as he shouted about important legal documents. The whole thing was caught on the store's cameras, and my manager wrote up an incident report. More harassment. More intimidation. More evidence. That night I couldn't sleep. My coworker stayed up with me on the couch, brewing tea neither of us drank, flipping through old sitcoms at low volume. We were both just waiting for the sun to rise. At 6:15 a.m. my phone rang. Detective Hinton. We're in, she said. The search lasted 4 hours. What they found was worse than even I'd imagined. Surveillance equipment in every room, even the bathrooms. Over 40 leather ledgers dating back 7 years, recording every single word. Locks on every cabinet and door, each one with a price list taped neatly beside it. Contracts Mom had forged, including one from when I was 7, my fake signature scrawled across the bottom. And a box of medical supplies, local anesthetics, suture kits, all ordered online. She'd been preparing. Within the hour, child services arrived and removed my brother from the house. I rode with the social worker to the emergency placement center, my hands trembling the whole way. The building was plain brick, the walls painted with bright murals meant to comfort scared kids. My brother sat in a small room clutching a teddy bear. He looked so much smaller than his 14 years. When he saw me, he opened his mouth like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. Then he stood and hugged me with everything he had. And the words finally broke through. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. His voice was scratchy, broken, but so alive. He repeated it again and again, even as the social worker gently separated us. I could still hear him whispering thank you as they led me out. 2 hours later, Detective Hinton called again. Mom had been arrested at her office. She tried to spin it, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that she'd just been teaching us financial responsibility. But the audio recording, her own voice talking about destroying my vocal cords, was irrefutable. Her cousin was picked up that same afternoon, still insisting he was just helping with childcare. The charges, child abuse, false imprisonment and extortion for Mom. Harassment and intimidation for him. The following morning was Mom's bail hearing. I sat in the back row with my attorney, heart racing. The prosecutor, a tall woman with iron gray hair pulled tight, laid it all out, the recordings, the photos, the ledgers. When she played the clip of Mom's voice coldly saying she wanted my vocal cords damaged permanently, the entire courtroom gasped. Mom's lawyer tried to argue she needed psychiatric help, not jail. But the judge wasn't having it. He set bail at $200,000, stating clearly that she posed an active danger to her children. Mom's face went pale, her lips trembling as she realized she wasn't walking out. That same day, the medical board suspended Dr. Baker's license pending investigation. News stations swarmed his office. Cameras caught him outside claiming Mom had blackmailed him, but he refused to elaborate without immunity. His practice was shut down within hours. By that evening, the story was everywhere. Channel 7's headline blared, "Mother charged for charging children to speak." A reporter stood outside our house, gesturing at the police tape as they explained the twisted word charging system. My attorney's phone rang nonstop with requests for interviews. She refused them all, telling the press I needed privacy to heal. She even set up a system. Any reporter who tried to reach me directly would get a cease and desist letter. For once, I wasn't the silent one anymore. The whole world was listening. The next week, Child Services dug deeper. They interviewed relatives I barely knew and uncovered something chilling. This wasn't new. My mom's father had done something similar to her when she was a kid. He charged her for electricity. Every time she flipped a light switch or plugged something into an outlet, he made her pay. One of Mom's sisters, a woman I'd never even met, told investigators that Mom used to swear she'd never do to her kids what had been done to her. But by the time I was born, she'd already invented the word charging system. The investigator shook his head and said quietly, abuse like this often runs in cycles. Meanwhile, my brother was placed with foster parents, Graciela and her husband Knox. They lived in a cheerful yellow house about 40 minutes away, with a huge backyard full of toys and trees. They'd been fostering for 15 years, and they knew how to handle kids who'd been through financial control and deprivation. On my first visit, Graciela gave me a tour of his room, posters on the walls, shelves full of books, and not a single camera in sight. She told me they encouraged him to talk as much as he wanted about anything. And there he was, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, humming to himself. Humming. I realized I had never once heard him make casual noise just for the sake of it. For me, therapy became a lifeline. Twice a week, I sat in a cozy office with soft chairs and potted plants spilling green into every corner. My therapist specialized in financial abuse and coercive control. She explained that charging children to speak wasn't quirky discipline, it was psychological abuse designed to strip away autonomy. She reminded me over and over, my voice was not expensive, it was not a privilege, it was a right. One day she even had me practice saying random words just to hear my own voice without flinching, without calculating what it would cost. 3 weeks after her arrest, Mom managed to post bail by putting her house up as collateral. Her lawyer tried to argue that the verbal contract I signed at age 7 was binding. Honestly, it sounded like trying to sue someone for breaking a playground promise to share Halloween candy. The protective order barred her from contacting us or coming within 500 feet. Within 48 hours, she broke it. Emails started flooding in from throwaway accounts, demands to drop the charges, new invoices with interest and penalties tacked on, like she still believed her system was real. My attorney forwarded everything to the prosecutor, and the police arrested Mom again, this time at a coffee shop, hunched over a laptop, churning out more fake invoices. A week later, the prosecutor sat her down with a plea deal, plead guilty and serve 5 years, possibly out in 3. Her weary lawyer urged her to take it. But Mom just sat there, chin high, insisting she'd done nothing wrong, that she was teaching us the value of words. The prosecutor closed the folder with a sigh. Then we'll see you at trial. 2 weeks after that, I was back at work stocking shelves when the victim services coordinator called. She told me about a state program to cover therapy and medical costs for abuse victims. The application was brutal, 3 hours of paperwork, copies of police reports, medical notes, expense receipts. My coworker helped me sort it all into a neat folder. A month later, I got the approval letter $2,000. It wasn't much, but it meant I could pay for therapy myself without feeling like a burden. My brother and I started supervised visits twice a week at the Family Services building downtown. That first day, we just sat across from each other, both of us nervous, both half expecting to be fined for speaking. The social worker gently suggested we talk about ordinary things. So we did. He told me about a cartoon he liked. I told him about a movie I'd seen. Soon we were trading small jokes, talking about food we wanted to try, silly things we'd heard. Each visit, the words came easier. Each visit, the silence cracked a little more. Then Detective Hinton called one morning with news that made my blood run cold. She'd been combing through Mom's financial records and found 3 credit cards in my name. Accounts I had never opened. A total of $30,000 in debt. Mom had been using my social security number since I was 12. Identity theft. Fraud. More charges stacked on her case. The detective told me I'd need to file reports with the card companies and sign affidavits swearing those accounts weren't mine. Just when I thought the list of things she'd stolen from me was complete, she'd managed to take even my name. 3 months after the night I climbed out that bedroom window, I found myself sitting in front of 23 strangers on the grand jury. The prosecutor had prepped me, but my palms still sweated and my throat went dry as I spoke. For 2 solid hours I told them everything, the silence, the ledgers, the locks on the bathroom, the way every word had a price. They asked me blunt questions. One juror leaned forward and said, "Did you really have to pay to use the toilet?" My voice cracked when I told them about holding it for hours, about wetting myself more than once because I couldn't afford the $2. Another asked about the rice punishment, and I explained what it was like eating 1 grain at a time for every dollar of debt Mom forgave. The prosecutor showed photos of the locks, the ledgers, and then played the audio recording, Mom's voice so casual, planning to have my vocal cords destroyed. By the time I stepped out, the jurors had voted unanimously, indict her on every single charge. At the next hearing, the trial date was set for 6 months out. Mom showed up with her 4th lawyer, who argued she needed a psychological evaluation, that she was suffering from delusional disorder and didn't know what she was doing. The prosecutor stood, cool and firm, pointing to Mom's meticulous ledgers, her contracts, the surveillance system. "This was planning," he said. "Not confusion." The judge ordered the evaluation, but sided with the prosecutor. Mom sat there scribbling in a notebook, her pen scratching like she was tallying up words all over again. A month later, I finally moved into my own space, a tiny studio apartment with a coworker who needed a roommate. The kitchen barely fit 2 people and the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors sneeze. But it was mine. No cameras. No sensors under the bed. No locks on the cabinets. That first night I flipped on every light switch, opened every cabinet door and stood there grinning like an idiot. My roommate probably thought I was insane, but she didn't say a word. My brother was back in school too, this time with teachers who actually understood. He had an IEP that let him write answers until he was ready to speak out loud. His math teacher said he was brilliant, faster than anyone in class. He still struggled, sometimes went quiet for hours, but he was improving. Weekly updates from the school counselor said he was making friends and had even joined the chess club. Then came the call I never expected. Dad. He'd seen the story on the news and called my job, his voice older, wearier. He said he was sorry for walking away, sorry for leaving us with her. He admitted the guilt had eaten at him for years. He offered money, support, anything we needed. I wasn't ready to forgive him, not even close. But I agreed to 1 phone call a week. He told me he'd been saving to repay child support and wanted to put it toward therapy for me and my brother. Meanwhile, the prosecutor brought in a forensic accountant. For weeks she picked apart every ledger, every receipt, every fake invoice Mom had kept. When she was done, the numbers were staggering. From the time I was 7 until I escaped at 17, Mom had billed us over $300,000 in speaking fees. My brother alone had racked up more than $100,000. 10 years of daily charges, made-up penalties, and compounding interest. The accountant said she'd never seen anything like it in 30 years of work. And Mom's cousin? He got arrested again for violating his restraining order after showing up at my apartment building. This time, his lawyer went straight to the prosecutor to cut a deal. He'd testify against Mom in exchange for probation instead of prison. His testimony was damning, $50 a day, plus bonuses for his enforcement services. He admitted to following us at school, reporting every conversation, intimidating teachers who tried to help. He even had receipts, tax records proving Mom paid him over $40,000 to spy on us. Piece by piece, the prosecutor stacked the evidence higher and higher. And in the middle of it all, I started building a life. I registered for community college, choosing social work because I wanted to be the person I'd needed all those years. The registration clerk helped me sort out financial aid and work study. My first class was Intro to Psychology. The professor asked us to introduce ourselves. My hands shook, but I stood anyway. I spoke for 30 seconds about why I was there, why I wanted to help others. My voice wavered, but each word landed stronger than the last. When I mentioned surviving family trauma, a few students nodded. The professor smiled and told me to keep speaking up in class. So I made myself a promise, once per discussion I'd raise my hand. 3 days a week I took the bus to campus. The other 4 I stocked shelves at the grocery store. For the first time in my life my words were free and I was choosing to use them. Meanwhile, my brother's foster parents filed paperwork to make their guardianship permanent. 3 months in, they brought him to visit me at my apartment. He sat on my little couch, fiddling with the strings of his hoodie, before blurting out that he wanted to stay with them for good. It stung hearing him call them Mom and Dad. My chest tightened like I couldn't breathe. But then I looked at him, really looked. He had put on weight, his cheeks fuller, his eyes brighter. He laughed easier. He smiled. They had a big yellow house with a pool and 2 goofy dogs, and they let him talk as much as he wanted without a single tally mark. Graciela showed me his report card, a perfect row of A's and photos of his birthday party, balloons, cake, friends. For the first time he had a childhood. I signed the papers. My hand shook, but I signed. Because loving him meant letting him be safe, even if it wasn't with me. As trial prep ramped up, the prosecutor's team uncovered horrors buried even deeper. Turns out, Dr. Baker wasn't the first. Mom had contacted 7 different doctors, asking about procedures to damage vocal cords. 6 of them had reported her, to medical boards, even to police, but nothing ever came of it because she used aliases. One doctor had recordings of her offering him $20,000. Another had written to child services, warning them about a mother trying to silence her children. And still, no one stopped her. Investigators even dug up her online purchases, medical equipment, surgical books, scalpels ordered piece by piece. She'd been planning my mutilation for over a year. 6 months after my escape, the trial began. Mom had burned through 3 lawyers by then and decided to represent herself. She marched into court in a stiff business suit, lugging boxes of her ledgers like they were the Bible. The courtroom was small, reporters scattered in the back row, pens scratching furiously. When it came time to cross-examine me, Mom tried to fire off questions herself. The judge cut her off almost immediately. He made her write her questions on paper, hand them to the bailiff and let him read them aloud. 20 pages, 20 of questions, mostly about why I was ungrateful and how much money she'd spent raising me. The prosecutor objected to nearly all of them. The judge sustained almost every objection. I testified for 4 hours. I spoke about the ledgers, the locks, the cameras, the surgery threat. My voice wavered but didn't break. Mom sat there, shaking her head, scribbling angry notes like she was still counting my words. My brother testified next. His voice was soft, halting, but strong enough to tell them about sleeping on cold concrete floors, about counting rice grains one by one, about being terrified to breathe too loud. His foster parents sat beside him, each holding a hand, anchoring him to safety. Then Mom's cousin took the stand, part of his plea deal. He laid it all out, the spying, the payment system, the intimidation of teachers. He even brought receipts showing Mom had paid him $40,000 to enforce silence. 3 of my old teachers testified too, describing the threats, the heartbreaking way they'd watched us retreat into silence. My school counselor showed her notes and the report she'd filed, all ignored by Mom's lies. 2 doctors told the jury about Mom's sick requests for illegal surgeries and the money she waved in their faces. And then Dr. Baker himself took the stand, shackled at the wrists, already facing conspiracy charges. He admitted she had leverage on him, prescription fraud she'd threatened to expose unless he helped her. The forensic accountant rolled out charts bigger than the jury box, proving the $300,000 in fabricated debt. She explained how Mom's system checked every box of extortion, fraud, and child labor violations. Finally, a child psychologist testified about the scars left behind. She didn't sugarcoat it. My brother and I had developed complex PTSD from years of systematic torture. 3 days of testimony. 3 days of reliving it all. When the jury finally filed out, we sat in the hallway waiting. My brother leaned against me, tapping away on his foster dad's phone, showing me his high score like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. 2 hours later, the bailiff called us back in. The jury foreman rose, voice steady, and read the verdict. Guilty. On all 14 counts. Child abuse. False imprisonment. Extortion. Conspiracy. Every last charge. Mom didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Didn't rage. She just bent over her notebook, scribbling away, like she was still counting the words we spoke. 3 weeks later, the courtroom was overflowing for sentencing. I stood at the podium, heart pounding, but this time I wasn't afraid of the sound of my own voice. I read my victim impact statement for 20 minutes straight. 20 minutes without stopping, without calculating the cost, without fear. I told them about the childhood she stole, about the voice she tried to rip from me, about the brother she scarred, and the father she drove away. I spoke about learning to use words again in college, about the nightmares where I'm drowning in ledgers, about flinching whenever someone asks me a simple question. I told them about my brother's healing, his new family, and the way we were learning to be siblings again. And I spoke about every single grain of rice, every locked door, every silent dinner, every birthday that meant another price hike. When the judge handed down the sentence, 8 years in state prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment, Mom stood up like she was the one giving a lecture. For 10 minutes, she rambled about how she'd been preparing us for a harsh world where everything has value. She said we'd thank her one day for proving words have consequences and silence has power. She even claimed the real crime was raising ungrateful children who couldn't appreciate her innovative parenting. The bailiffs let her out mid-rant, her voice still echoing about her supposed genius. Afterward, my brother and I started family therapy together every other week. The office near his school smelled faintly of lavender, and for once the air wasn't heavy with fear. We practiced normal conversations, movies, food, music, without survival looming behind every syllable. My brother started cracking awful puns, the kind that made me groan but also made my chest feel lighter. He told long, winding stories when 10 words would have been enough, dragging them out just because he could. And I loved every second. A few months later, a letter arrived. I'd won a scholarship for survivors of family violence. The essay prompt had asked about overcoming challenges, and I'd written 5 full pages without once counting a word. The scholarship covered tuition and books, allowing me to quit one of my jobs and pour myself fully into school. Around the same time, Dr. Baker faced his medical board hearing. Prosecutors laid out his conspiracy with Mom, and the board stripped him of his license permanently. He was sentenced to 6 months in county jail. One day, I received an apology letter from him. I read it once, something about mistakes and forgiveness, then tossed it straight in the trash and carried the garbage outside. I didn't want his words in my space. A year passed and I finally felt ready to do for others what my coworker had once done for me. The domestic violence shelter downtown needed someone who understood financial abuse, someone who could help survivors navigate restraining orders and safe housing. I applied without counting a single word on the form. When they hired me, I found myself sitting across from women who trembled telling their stories, and my voice stayed steady as I told them they deserved to speak freely. Some of them cried when they realized someone actually believed them. Meanwhile, my brother sent me a video from his very first debate competition. There he was, pacing the stage, gesturing with his hands, arguing about education reform for 20 minutes straight, while his opponent looked lost under the avalanche of words. He won. Then he won again. Soon, his foster parents were running out of shelf space for trophies. As for the old house, it went into foreclosure 6 months after Mom went to prison. On the day of the auction, I stood across the street, watching strangers haul boxes of surveillance cameras and monitors into trucks. One man held up a camera and asked if anyone wanted it for $5. I bought it. Took it home. And during my next therapy session, I smashed it with a hammer. The glass shattered, the wire snapped, and for the first time I felt the power shift. My therapist smiled and said it was healthy. We spent the rest of that hour talking about what it means to reclaim your voice, not just through speaking but through action. My coworker never left my side through all of it, and 3 years after the night with the knife, she stood right next to me as my maid of honor. During her toast, she said she knew I was worth saving from the very first silent shift at the grocery store, when I could barely ask a customer if they wanted paper or plastic. Then my brother stood up. He talked, really talked, for 10 full minutes about love, about freedom, about finding your voice again. Nobody checked their watch, nobody shifted impatiently, because every word coming out of him carried the weight of a miracle. The following spring, I graduated with my degree in social work. I used my savings to launch a nonprofit dedicated to cases of coercive control. We focus on the kind of abuse that hides in bank accounts and contracts, the kind that doesn't leave bruises you can photograph but leaves scars just as deep. We've taken on cases where parents charge kids rent at 10, where spouses monitor every penny, where adult children drain their parents' social security checks. We help victims document their cases and connect them with lawyers who know money can be used as a weapon. 5 years have passed since the night my brother pressed a knife to his own throat. Now, every Sunday, we meet for dinner at a diner halfway between our apartments. We order way too much food, laugh over dumb internet videos, and sometimes argue, loudly and passionately, about whether pancakes are better than waffles. The waitress always refills our coffee 3 times, and we always leave her a generous tip, because now we can be generous. Because now money isn't fear, it's freedom. Sometimes Mom comes up. Sometimes we mention the letters she sends from prison, the ones we don't bother opening. But more often we just talk about his college applications, my caseload, or the girl he's head over heels for. Last week he went on for an hour about her, and I didn't once tell him to speed up. Why would I? After all those years of silence, I'd let him talk forever. And me? Every once in a while, when stress creeps in, I catch myself counting words in my head like I used to. 5 words in that email, 25 cents at the old rate, 250 at the teenage rate. But then I stop. I shake my head, take a breath, and remind myself, my voice belongs to me now. No one gets to put a price tag on it again. I hit send without hesitation and get back to helping someone else learn that lesson too. The walls of my office are lined with thank you cards from clients who found their own voices. Right next to them are photos from my wedding, everyone laughing, talking, free. On my desk sits my brother's graduation photo. He's mid-sentence, his hands flying, his face animated. I keep it there as proof. Mom's ledgers are still locked in an evidence storage unit somewhere, probably gathering dust. The locks she drilled into our old house are long gone, replaced by new owners who likely never knew why every door and window had a sensor. And Dr. Baker? Last I heard, he was working at a hardware store, mixing paint. A fitting job for someone who once tried to erase voices, now helping people choose colors for brighter walls. Sometimes I speak at survivor conferences. I tell our story slowly, without rushing, without counting, without fear. People ask how we survived and I tell them the truth, we almost didn't. But then we found people who believed us. They ask if I've forgiven my mom. I tell them forgiveness isn't a requirement for healing. They ask if the counting ever stops. And I smile and say it gets quieter, until one day you hardly notice it at all. My voice is mine. It's free. And I use it every single day. Thanks for watching. Today's train wreck is over, but tomorrow's ride is already on track. Subscribe so you don't miss it.